Ladies and gentlemen, do you hear me? Yes. Fine. Then I begin. How time goes by. It was like yesterday that the first ARACHNE conference took place in Göteborg in early summer days of 1997. And I met for the first time both Agneta Strömberg, then very much alive, and it has been a great loss. But we have Lena Larsson-Lovén, and I had just returned from Japan and suffered of jet lag. I had been invited to join ARACHNE network and to give lectures in Japan thanks to a couple of articles in Analecta Romana Instituti Danici. I had difficulties in squeezing a 2-hour lecture into a short paper on Etruscan women, but all the same, I have participated in most of the ARACHNE conferences in Göteborg, Helsinki, Tampere, Copenhagen, Rome, and now again Rome. And with Agneta and Lena, we also had a session at the Social History Conference in The Hague. I don't remember the year. Oh, yes. Now, instead of giving you an overall presentation of the state of studies regarding Etruscan women with literary sources or nice pictures of beautiful women with rich jewelry, I will try to give you an idea of those of my research contributions which have brought something new or some new angles on Etruscan women and their social conditions, especially during the last 4 centuries BC. Statistical analysis, social networks, marriage patterns, images of couples, women buried with women, and so on. This is some kind of a summary of my contributions to the topic, so it is rather egocentric. Mostly published in ARACHNE volumes, but also elsewhere. Yet lots of issues are left out. Networking is an up-to-date issue in our times that has made its advent also into archaeological research, especially when studying the distribution of material objects. Before it became customary to use the concept networking, distribution maps of objects of various provenances like this have been used for illustrating exchanges and trade routes in the past. In fact, the first in 1874, there was a conference in Bologna where the subject had been chosen in Copenhagen a couple of years earlier, and that was focusing on Etruscans because they seemed to be one of the few things that could gather some material groups from the whole of Europe and Mediterranean world, including even Denmark and a little bit Sweden. As you can see, Etruscans participated in this mobility. The Etruria is marked here with a red area in the center. This mobility resulted in spreading of material culture and cultural phenomena. The Etruscans living in the red areas here in central and northern Italy, and also in Campania, made very much part of the ancient Greco-Roman world, in spite of their strange language and habits. Narrowing down the geographical area to Etruria proper, between Rome and Florence, we have a geological map to the left, and to the right, my homemade map with those places which have provided suitable material for my studies on gender issues. I'm sorry that it's a rather small screen for this, so I do hope that you have good eyes. My path to the Etruscans and to gender studies has not been straight. From 1963, that is for 60 years ago, I began to study at the Helsinki University such museum disciplines as archaeology, art history, and ethnography. Just in case, I took some courses in Italian, and I also took a degree in Roman literature. That gave me a ticket to the research team at the Finnish Institute in Rome, headed by Patrick Brun, which is the father of Christer Brun, at least some of you know. Our goal was to illustrate the last phase of Etruscan civilization, the period of transition to Roman times, seen from the angle of ancient history, epigraphy, and archaeology. Oh, I forget to comment that Helsinki University National Museum and my first window viewing over Rome was the uppermost to the left at Villalanti. My task was to study the last phase of the use of traditional Etruscan types of cinerary urns in Volterra, which also implied that a transition from the Etruscan language to Latin. It resulted in moving the end of the Etruscan culture there down to the Augustan period. Most scholars had buried the Etruscans in early 1st century BC, following the ancient sources. Here we see Volterra on the 500 meters high flat hilltop at the center of the picture, not on the steep hill to the right. I had to start by creating a rough chronological sequence for the urns in order to pick up the last phase of Etruscan tradition. You may or may not imagine me balancing on a high ladder with a camera, notebook, and tape measure through more than 20 exhibition rooms of the Musea Guarnacci at Volterra, which we see to the left, as well as several other museums. I finished my studies manuscript in 1971, but when our studies in the Romanization of Etruria was finally published in 75, several other studies on Volterran urns had appeared, as well as the first volume of the Corpus delle Urne Volterrane, which with closed tomb complexes. In spite of bad timing, I continued my studies on Volterran urn workshops and refining their chronology. Since my approach implied large-scale definitions of urn workshops, I was asked to recreate the idea of such a workshop for the Etruscan exhibition at Volterra in 85. I wonder whether the workshop has survived the present-day refurbishing of the museum. The 1,000 urns are just too much for the modern visitor, but their sheer number invites to statistical analysis. Probably you don't see anything at all of this table, but the number of women has been lower than that of men through the 300 years BC such urns were produced at Volterra. Women's percentages are highest when the production of urns was high. Less urns, less women. There are limits of equality, and this does not tell almost anything about hard demographic facts. It happened that some Etruscans, instead of getting a female lead figure when only male figures were available, had some male figures reworked into female ones with a few changes, like this. There are about 20 or so of this kind of reworkings. This happened already in the same workshop which had made the original versions. Normally you just bought the things from the shop, but there were always men, but not necessarily women. As a byproduct of counting the gender divisions, the Volterran results led me to ask whether this was true elsewhere in Etruria. So I counted all the sarcophagi, urns, and inscriptions which I knew of from the 400 years BC, comprising a material about 5,000 or 6,000 or so. The graph ought to show that women, the hatched areas, appear as a minority almost everywhere. The black patches refer to representations of couples, and the white areas refer to men. Cortona, with its restricted material, shows the heaviest male bias. It is in the middle of the left column diagram. Only in one place, Tuscania, the ratios are 50-50. This, as you can imagine, that it is, these results have very little to do with demography, but rather with the priorities, who buried who and why and what, and so on. Tuscania, in the utmost northern frontier of the Tarquinian territory, was flourishing while the mother city Tarquinia seemed to be in decline. A considerable number of family tombs, big family tombs, have been discovered in this inland center with its many rural settlements and necropolis around. The sarcophagi lying on the ground to the right came to light in the earthquake in the 60s, which revealed 3 tombs of the Kurunas family. Most of the late Etruscan sarcophagi and cinerary urns come from chamber tombs with 1 or more chambers, uniting families through several generations. The inscriptions help in identifying the relationships between those buried in the tombs. Here we see 2 Tuscanian sarcophagi, the young girl Ramza Curunei with a bull around her neck. The Romans adopted the use of golden amulet capsula bulla as a sign of freeborn boys. In Etruria, it protected also girls and animals, domestic animals. At Tuscania, the number of boys and girls is unusually high, and there are also elderly faces like this one to the right. From Chiusi comes the sarcophagus of Hasti Afunei, which is unique since her family members and even demons are identified by names. Inscriptions on the border of the chest. From the right, we see Hasti Afunoi herself, then her father Larf Afuni, her mother Thanquil something, and only then is shown her husband Vel Antony. Further to the left, her brother Larke Afuna, the sister-in-law Larthi Purnei, probably married with the youngest brother Larsa Afuna to the left. Larthi Purnei was a member of the Purni family whose cinerary urns have also been subject to my interest too, as well as that of Marina Sclafani, who has studied their proveniences and so on. In the Etruscan exhibition at Helsinki in 2003, I had arranged a family meeting for the Purnis coming from both Copenhagen and Florence. Perhaps you have noticed I have no intention to pronounce Etruscan, Latin, or Italian names according to English rules. Even the word Florence goes badly in style. It ought to be Firenze. Also, some other inscriptions hint to family relations further than just the nearest kin. This marble sarcophagus was painted with Amazonomachia seeds. The fine paintings were not respected when the name of the deceased was scratched on the sarcophagus and on its lid. They both tell that here lies Ranthahusgnai, grandmother of Larth Apayatru, Sil Ederaya. The meaning of the title Sil Ederaya has been discussed. Since they thought that the grandchild would be quite young, they had thought it was the chief of the youth or something like that. But if he was adult, it could be kind of association of adult men too. Anyway, something important. And he may have paid for the costly sarcophagus, who knows. But this gives an idea of a close link between grandparents, especially grandmothers, and their grandchildren, if they happen to be alive at the same time. Perhaps the grandson had been involved in financing the costly sarcophagus. Now we come to marriage alliances. When choosing the closest social network, the spouse, we do not know much of the role which the bride or groom themselves had in the decision-making, if any. The extant archaeological and epigraphical material give mostly insight into elite circles where the families found proper matches, both within the local societies and also between different city-states. I have recently published a paper dealing with the interstate marriage alliances, giving some examples of women being married to equally high-status men far away from home. This is a well-known method of achieving and maintaining elite status and widening the sphere of interests, and also as a pacifying measure. The abundance of inscriptions in the last 4 centuries BC is an invaluable source of information. The Etruscan name system in its most complete form gives the first name, the family name, always inherited from the father, and women kept that name throughout their lives. Then comes the first name of the father, the family name of the mother, and for women also their husbands' names, but not the other way around. But instead of just using the onomastic material for linguistic purposes, I have tried to connect the archaeological context and provenances with the persons in question. It is possible to plot the gentilicia on a map, linking them to precise sites. When comparing the distribution of male forms of gentilicia, we see that the female forms of the same names often show a much larger distribution. These marriage alliances secured a large social network for the elite, binding the different city-states and their territories together. This Cuisine urn I'm showing here gives just one example of economic interests lying behind the matchmaking, also within the same community and even middle class, higher middle class level. This women's double gentilicium refers to families. She has 2 gentilicia because perhaps 2 families had been joined because one of them was dying out. They were both slave owners. as were both her mother's and her father's families. From all these persons, we know names of free-given and still enslaved persons whose names point to Eastern Mediterranean origin, Antipater, Serapiu, and that like. The alphabet and the scenery urns follow local cuisines customs. And I think that not only working as farmers, these slaves have even created the enormous industry of clay things and stone industry in the cuisine area. So they have been really also thinking of their own, how to got down the earth. In the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, there are examples of socially mixed marriages, especially in the cuisine area. However, there is an early example of such a match from Orvieto from the end of the 6th century. We see Orvieto in the background, and in the foreground, the excavations of Campo della Fiera, which have brought to light the remains of a very long-lived sacred place, the best candidate for the federal sanctuary of the Etruscans, Fanum Voltumne, and an ideal place for knitting elite relationships between the different city-states. The statue base to the right shows an inscription telling who had dedicated a bronze statue, which is missing. From the sockets, we can see that it has been about 1/3 of a human size, and it has been a bronze. But the inscriptions and the base of stone has not been brought to Rome by the Romans, who stole some 3,000 bronze statues. That was a woman called Canuta, a name which points to Campania. She is defined as the free-given slave of the Laricenas family, one of those families who had a fine chamber tomb in Orvieto. She was the wife of Pinnie. We don't know of any Pinnies from Orvieto in the 6th century, but 2 centuries later, we meet them again. In Tarquinia, they had a very fine painted tomb, Tomba Giglioli. Simonetta Stopponi, who has led the excavations and published the finds at Orvieto, has proposed that Canuta might have given the statue to the sanctuary in gratitude for her high status marriage. Of course, there are no proofs, but I would add that she herself might have climbed on the social ladder by filling a cultic office in the sanctuary, making the match more equal. The bronze statue, as I said, have been brought to Rome, and in Rome the bronze statues have vanished, and only the base with inscription of the Volsinian statues brought to Rome by Fulvius Flaccus is left. So metal is a dangerous thing to try to commemorate anything. Continuing with the issue of couples, elite couples, Etruscan art has left behind a long series of more or less charming images of them. In the Archaic period, the end of the 6th century BC, as these groups from Cerveteri, they are smiling and the spouses seem to be very fond of each other. At least that was the ideal, whatever the reality is. At the end of the 19th century, an author suggested that the images couldn't possibly show married couples, but instead a man and a paid woman, as on Greek vases, since they obviously had great time together. From the Roman imperial period, we know of a number of huge sarcophagi with couples on their lids, but in the pre-Roman times, such figures were an Etruscan speciality. Some of the most intriguing couple representations come from Vulci, with both images and inscriptions. Normally the Fiora River seen in the foreground is almost without water, but after heavy rain I took the picture to the right. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston has two very interesting sarcophagi showing a couple in two generations, both from a chamber tomb at Vulci. This one shows a naked couple embracing each other under a common blanket. The sarcophagus has reliefs on all four sides. It was intended to be placed centrally in the chamber tomb. On the wife's side, we see male duels. On the male side, duels between Amazons and male warriors. I think that it had been switched. It was designed to be the other way around. But anyway, on the short side, they are combating animals. And the blunder had happened when the inscription on the gable and the chest border were added. These inscriptions tell that the man is called Larth Tetnies, the woman Thanquil Tarnai. I just comment on the Thanquil, which is the famous Tanaquil. It was a quite normal Etruscan female name. Thana is a goddess, and quil means a gift, that is Theodora, Dorothea. Shh. And a longer inscription adds even more details. He was generated by, that is, his parents were Antetnie and Ranthavishnai, and her parents were Margetarne and Ranthakhaire. That is, both parents of both of the spouses are mentioned, which is quite rare. This is unique. The wife's parents' names might point to an origin at Cerveteri. In fact, those buried in the very famous San Paolo tomb 2 in Cerveteri, with the famous bucero depictions of early Greek myth, belong to the Tarina. Tarina happens to be in Finnish a story, but that is another thing. Tarina Tarna. We meet again the husband's parents in the second Vulci sarcophagus in Boston. That is, it is much narrower. There was just space for one person in the chest, and the inscription tells that we are dealing with a mother, Ranthavishnai, defined as the wife of Arnth Tetnies. So it is not telling that they both are inside, but that was she with her husband. Although the sarcophagus was designed to host only one person, much stress is laid on the union and balance between the married couple. The reliefs decorate three sides of the chest, that is, was designed to be placed along a wall. In the middle of the front relief, the couple is shaking hands. Behind them are a male and female procession carrying their insignia and paraphernalia. The husband must have been a magistrate, since they carry his symbols of office, among others, sella curulis, a portable chair, of which Ria talked today. While the women carry objects which may refer to either the wedding, her toilet equipment, or even to cultic functions. The short sides of this sarcophagus show a bearded man in a chariot to the right and 2 persons in a 2-wheeled wagon to the left. The persons in the wagon have mostly been taken as a couple under a parasol, but a closer look reveals that we are dealing with 2 women with breasts and similar clothes and jewelry, including earrings. It is, in fact, important to look at the object themselves and not just pictures. The presence of the winged female death demon, Vanth, reveals that they are not heading towards a wedding, but belong to the afterworld, perhaps to meet the newly deceased mother, who is shaking hands at the center of the front relief. Shaking hands, dextrarum junctio in Latin, made part of the wedding ceremony, obviously also among the Etruscans. But it appears also in farewell scenes, and they would also greet each other when meeting again in the afterlife. We may ask who were still alive, who were already dead, waiting for the newly arrived. The matter has been eagerly discussed. I would propose that the time level was left open on purpose in order to express different important moments in the cycle of life and afterlife, in the times between the living and the dead. I also proposed that the younger couple had died first and been buried in the large sarcophagus together, and that the husband's mother loved the idea so much that she wished to have something similar to herself, while the husband had already been buried somewhere. More or less contemporary with the Volscian couples, around 300 BC or slightly before, is probably this double urn from Betole in the inner Etruria. The inscriptions tell that the man was called Velheimni, son of Tutei, and that the woman was Thanquil Kilne. Again, a one-time Thanquil. There's no end of those Thanquils here, daughter of Velasne. The Heimnis were a local elite family at Betole, but his mother's name Tutei points to Vulci. The wise family, the Kilni, belonged to the most powerful ones at Arezzo, known, for example, for asking, and this is from written sources, for asking for Rome's help in slave revolts, and as Maecenas' maternal ancestors. The Kilnis had tight connections also with the area between Chiusi and Tarquinia, and one Lars Kilni was married with the leading Tarquinian family of the Spurini. The couple on this slide from Betole is shown in a curious compromise between 2 moments of the wedding. They are shaking hands, but in the wedding bed, naked, and under a common blanket, and the bride is wearing all her jewelry around her neck. I have never seen the urn. It had disappeared who knows where when I began to be interested in the matter in the 1980s. Sorry. It had now turned to be where I would never have accepted to seek for it, the Bible Lands Museum in Jerusalem. I'm quite sure that the lid ought to be turned around. The heads on the list are always to the right. Here they are to the left. So it is a big error. This splendid urn comes from Monteriggioni in the outskirts of Volterra, territory along the communication routes towards every possible direction, as they still are. I just saw the Archeo of October, where Monteriggioni and the tomb where this comes from are mentioned. The inscription tells that I am the urn, that is mi capra in Etruscan, of Kalisna Larth Sepu, son of Anth, and the urn of Kursney. The wife's role in the inscription, with only her family name, is as modest as her position on the lint, hiding behind her husband. But she must have been quite a scoop. The Kursneys were among Fiesole's leading families, city wall builders and magistrates in charge of setting boundary stones and that like. There are inscriptions from Fiesole with their name on. Kalisnas had a very big family tomb at Monteriggioni with 105 burials through 3 centuries. Especially the Kalisnei daughters were married to many other places and more than one to Tuscania. Others were spread all over Etruria. Great economic interests seem to have been involved in the matchmaking. Here we see Volterra's most famous couples from about 100 BC. I have written about the couple 4 years ago, providing a list of all Etruscan couples I knew of. Now a few more have turned up. It is quite fascinating to go around the group and see their expressions and power relations change. From one angle, the wife seems to express supine admiration of her husband, but from another angle, where we see her en face, she looks very angry, and he seems to tell that I have heard that before. Since the 1980s, I have also been intrigued about the problem who were buried with whom in the big Etruscan family tombs. The normal pattern is that the family tomb gave only entry to the family's men, their wives, their sons, their wives, and so on. This is the, I think that I have the, oh yes, I have to, well, there's a little bit, I have a switch, something. I have to finish this before going to the to the table I have made on. Anyway, you can't see anything of the table anyway. With time, especially the Chiusine and Perugine areas and in the inland countryside, some married daughters were buried with their family of origin, and further, even with some of the daughters' in-laws accepted in her own family's male tomb. Here we have tomba dei rilievi from Cerveteri, which belong to the family Matuna. And there are 6 Matuna daughters buried in this tomb. We don't know if they were married or not, but 6 unmarried daughters must have been quite a loss. While to the right, we see the largest pure male tomb from Etruria. It is the Kutu tomb from Perugia. If you have been in Perugia, it is reconstructed in its entirety in the basement of the museum, and you can peep through windows to it. But anyway, there are 50 men and no women, and that is not, it doesn't really tell who they were getting children with. Anyway, such male tombs may have created a demand for purely female tombs. Here is the absolutely illegible table. If someone volunteers to make better modern ones, I would not say no. Anyway, the normal thing is agnatic wives, their sons, their wives, and so on. That is the normal thing. All the other numbers are lower. A special case is provided by the Tomba delle Iscrizioni at Vulci. In the tomb, women of different families were buried and commemorated with inscriptions written on the walls. But also their husbands and sons were allowed to join. Many still call it the tomb of the Prussianness, admitting that some other families had succeeded in taking over the tomb, which continued to be used for long. However, the common denominator for the occupants is that 6 of the women recorded on the walls bear the title Hatrenko. I'm sorry for the more or less illegible plotting of the inscriptions on the tomb plan, but the black dots and red markings refer to the Hatrenkos. The meaning of the word is still discussed, but I have suggested that they had earned the title for something very important, so important that the rules of the agnatic family tomb were set aside, so even their husbands were willing to break the rules. Members of women's councils, priestess collegia, or ordo matronarum is a possibility, but perhaps with important cultic functions. In Etruscan society, the dividing line between civic and religious offices was not clear-cut, on the contrary. The same persons could function in both kinds of offices. At any rate, if priestesses, they did not prevent them, this did not prevent them from getting married, having children, or keeping close ties to their families. At the moment, I'm mostly inclined to translate Hatrenko as matrona, but in that case, a very important matrona indeed. The tomb was, when discovered, the tomb was already robbed, and fragments of only one sarcophagus was left in one of the chambers. Not by chance, again, the battle between Greeks and the Amazons was chosen to decorate the 4 sides of the chest. It's really a puzzle consisting of many, many fragments. I have also published a paper in the ARACHNE volume titled Fit for Fight, Fit for Marriage, on fighting couples in Etruscan nuptial and funerary iconography, and found several regions for the popularity of this motive for women. Here are bits and pieces left by the tomb robbers. The golden nail heads up to the right probably fixed a golden inscribed tablet, something like the Purgi tablets with extremely interesting inscriptions. But here the tablet itself is missing. What a pity. When preparing my article on possible Etruscan princesses, published in 1990, I came across a number of female sarcophagi and their fragments in the Museum of Tarquinia. They are all ceremoniously as if standing, with a priestess-like cylindric headgear, polos on their heads. There were no inventory numbers, no information about them, but now their prominences have been reconstructed by Valentina Vincenti, and they are on display together in the Museum of Tarquinia. The sarcophagi come from the Tomba Bruschi in the necropolis of Monterozzi. Its wall paintings are now in a very bad shape, but they were copied in the 1860s, while the prominence of the many stone sarcophagi was almost forgotten. There were 5 female sarcophagi of this sacral appearance, but also a few male ones. And the tomb paintings mostly refer to male public offices, office holders, and youth. But there is also a lady looking at herself in a mirror held by her maid. And there below are two other female lead figures. The inscriptions on the walls of this tomb tell that the tomb belonged to the family Apuna, with married ties with the Pinias, already mentioned in the connection with the Orvietan dedication, and other leading families of Tarquinia. It would be very interesting to know which role the Polos women had played. One more addition to my paper on Etruscan priestesses and their burials came in 2008 in the Tumulo delle Onde Marine in the necropolis of Banditaccia at Cerveteri. Not much remained of the 3rd century grave goods, but there were such unusual objects as 2 terracotta busts with enormously rich jewelry, a votive statue with 2 sitting veiled women with a child, and a female statue. As to burials, one was in a small stone sarcophagus and another in a cubic cinerary urn. Moreover, there were 5 empty niches for further burials. A very unusual tomb indeed. I'm waiting for a closer. What is happening here? Hold on. The rest of this paper will be dedicated to Perugia, from where we know of the biggest purely main tomb, the Cutus, which has been showed already. Perugia is also the place with several purely female tombs, albeit small, have been discovered through the ages, and the town is now the record holder as to the number of Etruscan couples. In this Renaissance painting, we see the Etruscan Porta Marzia to the left of the center, and it is still there. The problem with the women's tombs is that they have seldom been recognized as such, because even neat genealogical lineages don't reveal any dominant male family. Women's gentilicium changed in every generation. I'm giving here only a few examples of such Perusian women's graves included in my paper in the Finnish Institute's volume on female networks. Katarina knows it. In this recent publication of Perusian funerary inscriptions, Jorma Kaimio has identified a few more. The first one of such purely female tombs was discovered in the Palazzone necropolis since 1797, with 5 female urns with inscriptions. Here we see the finest of them, the one of Fastinakere, Velimna's wife. The husband's family, Velimna, Volumnius, possessed the most magnificent tomb of them all, the tomb of the Velimnas Volumnius in the same necropolis, and it can be visited in situ. The women's genealogical ties in the tomb of this older tomb are rather complicated, with parallel lines in 3 generations. And it also contained one of the finest Etruscan mirrors sold to Berlin. It is older than the urns, so we are dealing with an heirloom object. At Santa Lucia, the matrilineal sequence of 5 generations of women is clear in the tomb discovered in 1925 at Perugia, Santa Lucia. The last in the line is Larthi Paniati, Ansei's daughter. Ansei is the mother. She is represented on the urn in a self-confident posture, as if a male togatus in front of the gable and surrounded by musicians. Perhaps a priestess, who knows. One more women's tomb was discovered in 1985 at Cassalia near Perugia. There were obviously some difficulties in keeping the matrilineal sequels going on, and a stepdaughter had to stand in. One of the urns, the one for Thania Veltsne, represents a kissing couple, but the inscription defines her as Luesna's wife. That is, Luesna himself was not buried in the urn. The last of the 4 urns was designed for a man, with no attempts to make it look more feminine. The inscription is in Latin. Luesna's daughter has become Lucinia. The central part of the inscription was erased, and then follows Iote. Here we are close to 40 BC, when the city was accidentally destroyed by fire during the Perusian War. There were obviously difficulties in continuing the matrilineal line, both family-wise as to providing suitable urns. The last picture shows a late urn from Perugia, from a tomb discovered as late as after the turn of the millennium at Strozza Capponi, with both male and female burials, and with some travertine quarries in the nearby, where the material for these urns was quarried. This is the urn of Aule Anei Markna, with well-preserved polychromy. In spite of the lipstick, the image represents a man. The tears falling down Aule's cheeks tell that he was weeping, and so were all the 4 persons on the urn relief. The couple, Aule, his wife, and their children, all maid and servant. In these recent tomb finds, the conservators have been able to catch and preserve all the colors and details. Marriages being arranged or not, expressions of grief were part of the imagery, both for women and men. My concluding remarks are very short. Next to nothing of all this has been told of in literary sources. In recent decades, scientific analysis of bones, DNA, and other organic remains for strontium isotope analysis and so on have added decisive insight into human relations and movements, but without names. The study of burial archaeology and grave goods have moved from typological and chronological issues to gender studies and to reading the messages which the survivors wish to leave behind, that is, to the study of the human mind. In the present case, the abundant epigraphical material combined with the context are able to substantiate a number of issues dealing with anonymous archaeological material, and even to widen the range of possibilities when mapping social networks.